Have you ever wondered what it was like to travel down the Erie Canal in the 1800s? Well, come join us this week on our Tuesday program. The following is a presentation from the Greece Historical Society. The second Tuesdays of the month programs from the Greece Historical Society are sponsored by members of the Greece Historical Society and by the sponsors of advertisements in the newsletter. Space for today's program is sponsored by the Greece Central School District's Transportation and Support Services Facility. From New York to Niagara Falls in 1840, a traveler's journal. Presented by Maureen Whalen, recorded September 9th, 2025.
Good evening and welcome. Welcome to the Student Services and Student Transportation Building here at Greece Central. Hope everyone had a wonderful summer. It's exciting that we are resuming these monthly programs, and I think you're in for a real treat, because I know Maureen is always a fantastic and tremendous presenter. So we're looking forward to just a few housekeeping tidbits. The restrooms are to my right or your left. Maureen will have the microphone, and as long as you can see a TV, you should be able to see and hear the presentation just fine. But before we get to Maureen, I want to introduce Bill Sowers, the president of the Greece Historical Society, and all the amazing work he does to coordinate and organize and put events like this on for the Greece community and the greater Rochester community. So without further ado, Bill Sowers.
Thank you. I do want to tell you about, can you hear this?
Yes.
Next month, and we'll be at the library, and next month's Tuesday night program is on the history of Durand Eastman Park. And our November program, we're going to have the story of the Morgan Manning house that had the major fire in January. And the project manager of that project will tell the story of the fire and what they've been doing to mitigate asbestos and everything else, and what their plans are for the future. And last January at one of these meetings, during the meeting is when their fire was. So I want to introduce our speaker tonight. I tried to get this down to one page. Maureen is a Greece resident, retired and former head librarian of the Shalat Library. She's been involved in the Shalat and Greece community and the Greece Historical Society for, let's just say, a long time. She helped organize a First Thursday history program at the Shalat Branch Library and also facilitated a book club there for nearly 25 years. And while working for the Rochester Public Library, she completed and wrote the book, Rochester Public Library, 100 Years of Service. Was that a book or is that was a book? As a member of the Greece Historical Society since 2012, she created several major exhibits at the museum, including Winning the Vote for the Women in Greece, Underground Railroad in Shalat in Greece, and Our Town in World War II. In addition, she co-wrote two books, Winning the Vote and Our Town in World War II. She researched and organized and conducted several tours of Holy Sepulchre Cemetery and Mother of Sorrow Cemetery. For the Bicentennial, she wrote and narrated, and along with producer Pat Warboys, 54 5 to 10 minute podcasts called Bicentennial Snapshots about the history of Greece. And this year she chaired our Erie Canal Bicentennial Committee. In her spare time, Maureen has been a long-time volunteer at the Seneca Park Zoo, and a few years ago she wrote a book, The History of Seneca Park Zoo, which is on sale at Amazon?
Yeah,
bookstore.
it is.
Oh, yeah, you can buy that book at our bookstore, in our museum. So she's a true unsung hero of local history. Please welcome Maureen Whalen.
That was very nice. So let me tell you a little bit about tonight's program. Once the canal was completed in 1825, the 200th anniversary, which we are celebrating, it became the hot tourist attraction to travel from New York City to Niagara Falls. And there were a number of people who, after completing the trip, wrote what it was like to travel on the canal. So at least a dozen, because those are the ones I read. So it's a fictional narrative. The two main characters are fictional, but everything that happens to them and they see is true. It's based on someone's account of what happened to them. May 23, 1840. Tomorrow, my brother Michael and I set off on a grand adventure. We are traveling to Niagara to see the magnificent falls, and we shall go by way of the great Erie Canal. How thrilling to be embarking on a trip of which I've heard so much. I've decided to keep a journal of our trip, like Mr. Hawthorne, or that daring travel writer Anne Royal with her famous notebooks. I plan to take ink and my dipping pen, of course. Mother presented me with a leather-bound journal on my last birthday with numerous pages. We will travel by steamboat to Albany, where we will begin our trip west on the canal. I have seen the packet boats wintering in the North River. Several weeks ago, a tug took them to Albany for the start of the canal season. May 24th. We left New York in the steamboat Albany at 7 a.m. for the city of Albany. The distance is 145 miles, and the fare is $3, meals extra. There are two lines of boats up the river, one being a day and the other a night line. The night line leaves at 5 and is fitted with elegant berths for sleeping, and is certainly the most convenient way of traveling, unless, as in my case, the traveler has not been up the river and is desirous of seeing its highly picturesque scenery. Our boat, though not the swiftest and the most elegant of the line, is still a very handsome affair. She is upwards of 200 feet long. The views here are very romantic. The river varies in distance from a half mile to 3 miles wide. After leaving New York, the first object worthy of notice is the Palisades, a remarkable range of steep rocks in which the height varies from 15 feet to 550 and extends up the river for a distance of 20 miles. At the commencement of the highest of these rocks once stood Fort Lee, elevated about 300 feet from the river. After Washington evacuated New York, he drew off his army to this place. It is a distance of 68 miles from New York. After passing many villages, we arrive at Catskill, behind which is the celebrated mountains, one of the peaks of which is elevated about 3,000 feet above the river. There is a hotel upon it, and it is a place of resort during the summer months. The landing is 112 miles from New York. About 6 miles further up the city of Hudson. Behind this city, Marshalls of Manchester have a large calico printing establishment. After passing here, the river becomes thickly studded with small islands, which, though very picturesque, render the navigation difficult. In the vicinity of Albany, the river contracts very much in width and becomes much more shallow, as it is with some difficulty that the steamboat could pass over some of the sandbars. At 8 p.m. we arrive in Albany. It was now quite dark. Consequently, we could not judge of its appearance, particularly as there are no lamps in the streets. Our passage, it will be perceived, was about 13 hours. A long one, as it has frequently been done, in 10 hours. We stayed at the Western Hotel on State Street. This street is a wide, beautiful, clean street with the State House in the center of it, surrounded by a huge green square enclosed with an iron railing. May 25. There is an appearance of considerable business in the town, as it is here that the great Erie Canal joins the Hudson, affording means for the interchange of agricultural and commercial produce between New York and the vast extent of Western country. The bustle in State Street is very great. The buildings are fine, and the private carriages and horses quite handsome. The City Hall has a gilded dome, the gilding of which cost $1,000. Albany is the capital of the state. The State House, or Capitol, occupies a very elevated and commanding situation. The Assembly were in session, but we had not time to listen to their discussions. From Albany, we will travel by packet boat. Michael set out to arrange our passage. We booked accommodations on the Polly, one of the packet boats traveling from Albany to Schenectady. It's remarkable to think that by traveling the canal, we reduce the time it takes to get to Niagara Falls by half when traveling by stagecoach. One avoids the prospect of having to sit so close to disagreeable passengers, and also serious injury if the coach is overset. As I overheard one gentleman say, even if the boat experiences a mishap and one ends up in the water, it is only 4 feet deep. May 26th. On board the Polly, we find ourselves at 4 a.m. in the middle of the canal, and a fog so dense that if it had been good, you could have barely eaten it. As the sun ascended, however, the day became very pleasant. During the remainder of the day, our attention was continually called to the beautiful river of the Mohawk, which runs very near to the canal for 150 miles, and over which the canal is carried by aqueducts in 2 places. Upon leaving Albany and beginning our journey to the Western country, I felt that we had fairly commenced our adventure. Our ultimate destination, of course, was Niagara Falls. But on the way to that celebrated spot, we expect to see the entire Erie Canal, the newly settled districts lying on its banks, and many other interesting objects besides. If we had been seasoned travelers, we might have chosen a different mode of transportation to get to Schenectady, either the stagecoach or the short line railway from Albany. There are 27 locks between these 2 points. It is rather monotonous going through a great many locks. After we had seen our boat go through 2 or 3 times, we understood the process, and after that it is only a tedious repetition of the same thing. That first day's journey to Schenectady, a distance of only 16 miles in a direct line from Albany, was twice as far by the route we followed because Michael was eager to see the junction of the Erie Canal with the branch which connects it with Lake Champlain. Near the village of Waterford, we had an opportunity of examining a string of 9 locks by which the canal is raised to the level of the country lying to the westward of Albany. I have seldom known a more busy scene. Crowds of boats laden with flour, grain, and other agricultural produce were met by others as deeply laden with goods from all parts of the world, ready to be distributed over the populous regions of the West. At 10 a.m., we reached Schenectady, a busy and very thriving village. We were greatly interested by the bustle of stagecoaches arriving and departing, and by the numerous canal boats dashing up to the wharf in the very center of the town and immediately setting off again, all crowded with passengers, the whole wearing a highly characteristic air of business and dispatch. We were going to take a different packet boat for the trip to Utica, which was not scheduled to leave until 2 p.m. We took the opportunity to visit Union College. We gathered at an inn with many others waiting to depart. As to our host in Schenectady, the house was very full while waiting for the canal boat to avoid the pressing crowds with which all the rooms were filled. Michael and I walked out onto the veranda when a pretty girl about my age, the daughter I concluded of the house, seeing how the noise affected me so, invited us into a very nice private parlor belonging to the family, where I found a fine piano, lots of books, and music. We left Schenectady in the canal packet and were towed along at the rate of 3.5 miles per hour upon the average. The horses are not allowed to go any faster than 4 miles per hour. The boat moved so quietly that if it was not for the occasional splash of the tow line, there would not be a ripple upon the smooth surface of the water. Everything looked rich and green. The canal, for the distance of 26 miles, which we traveled upon it, winds along the base of a low and prettily wooded bank on the south side of the Mohawk River. Our perpendicular height above the stream may have been 30 or 40 feet, by which elevation we commanded a range of prospect, both up and down, of great extent and variety. The scene looked really one of enchantment. We sat during most of the day on deck. Children were given the run of the boat. I feared one boy who climbed atop the railing would end up in the canal water, which was none too clean, I shudder to point out. Another couple kept their little girl running about at the end of a shawl, by which she was tethered for better security against tumbling overboard. My father was a vocal proponent of the canal. He took Michael and me to see the wedding of the waters back in 1825. I was but 7 years old, and Michael almost 10. My dad used to say that the canal is carried through a country so splendidly adapted to all canaling purposes, as the local phrase is, that the result, contrary to the usual expectations, has more than answered the prospects of its projectors. In this view, it is pleasing to think that its main supporter, through all its trials and doubts and difficulties, Mr. DeWitt Clinton, lived to see its complete success, and to reap, in words at least, the full acknowledgement of his country. The evening is delightful. The serenity of the scene is really charming. I sat upon the bow of the boat, reveling in the mountain air, and watching the last rays of the setting sun as it gilded the rocks and sparkled in the bright waters of the Mohawk, which were separated from our boat only by the towpath. Later, we moved along under a crescent moon. May 27. As far as your eye can reach, the boats are approaching or receding, and their horses trotting on with a steady but slow gait, while their riders sit listlessly, whistling or singing and keeping time with the long leash of their whips. So enthralled have I been with passing scenery, I've neglected to describe our boat. As we approached the boarding area, we saw a short distance before us a high bridge. It was where the canal passed under the street. There was a flight of steps at each side of the bridge, leading down to the banks of the canal. We found our packet boat ready to receive its passengers. The canal was very broad at this place. A canal is usually made broad where it passes through a town. Along the sides of it were walls of stone, and these walls were continued up under the bridge, high enough to form abutments for the bridge to rest upon. The packet boat was fastened by a rope to an iron hook in the lower part of the abutment of the bridge. The boat was long and narrow, with a row of windows on each side. There were Venetian blinds painted red before these windows, and the boat itself was painted white. This gave it a very gay appearance. It was a much handsomer boat than we had expected to find. The top of the boat was nearly flat, being only curved a little from the center towards each side so that the rain might run off. There was a very small iron railing, not more than 6 inches high along the edges. This deck was 4 or 5 feet above the water. At the bows, and also at the stern of the boat, there was a lower deck, with steps to go down to it, and from the lower deck in the stern, there were other steps leading into the cabin. There was a row of trunks and carpet bags on the deck. The cabin was a long and narrow room which occupied almost the whole interior of the boat. It looked like a pleasant little parlor, only its shape was, well, very long and narrow. There were seats on the sides, under the windows covered with red cushions. They extended the whole length of the cabin. There were 1 or 2 tables in the middle with some books and maps upon them. The cabin was divided into 2 parts by a projection from each of the 2 sides, which projections, however, were so narrow that they left a very wide opening between them, almost as wide as the whole breadth of the cabin. There was a large crimson curtain hung over this opening, so that when the curtain was let down, it would divide the cabin into 2 distinct parts. Over this curtain, there was painted in gilt letters the words, "Ladies' Saloon." That part of the cabin, which was beyond the curtain, was intended particularly for the ladies, and it could at any time be separated from the other parts by dropping the curtain. In the middle of the ladies' cabin was a table with books and a bouquet of flowers upon it. There were several ladies sitting upon the cushioned seats at the sides of the saloon. On the table in the gentleman's part of the cabin was a writing desk with a large sheet of paper upon it. This was the waybill on which the names of the passengers were to be entered. The clerk, who was in the cabin when Michael and I came in, took a pencil from the till of the desk and said to Michael, "What name, sir?" Michael replied, "Michael Fitzgerald and Miss Julia Fitzgerald." We were not the first passengers to board, nor the last. That would be significant later at bedtime. The stuffy air in the cabin, for the windows do not open, prompted me to spend as much time on deck as the fine weather would allow. The captain was a gracious man and could not have been more than 33 in age. Nevertheless, I heard the cook, surely a man of at least 60, refer to the captain as the old man. The cabin boy explained to me that the captain of the ship, no matter his age, is always called the old man by his crew. A typical crew on a packet boat was captain, steward, helmsman, bowsman, cook, cabin boy, and a driver on the towpath with the horses. The helmsman, or sometimes the driver, is responsible for using a bugle to sound alerts. Canal traffic never stops, passing through day and night, and bugle blasts sound throughout the day and night to signal the arrival of boats needing a change of horses or mules. The number of blasts denote the number of fresh horses needed. The tin horn also alerts lock tenders a boat is arriving, keeping them busy day and night as well. I can't think when they might have a chance to rest. Sometimes the bugle is used to signal passengers that the boat will soon be underway. The helmsman steers the boat, a duty he shares with the captain in 6-hour shifts. There are many small bridges spanning the canal, connecting every man's farm. As pleasant as drifting along the canal is, nothing on earth, however, it should seem, is without some drawback, and our daydreams accordingly were much disturbed by the necessity, every quarter of an hour of stepping hastily down off the deck or stooping over to keep from being knocked down overboard or under penalty of having one's head crushed to atoms as we passed under one of these innumerable little bridges. Their height was barely sufficient for the boat to shoot through. It was rather amusing at first to hop down and then to hop up again, and when we were all prostrated, I confessed I always peeked about to see how comically everybody looked and get up convulsed with laughter. But by and by, this skipping about became very tiresome, and admired the tranquility of the day very much. After having been served dinner on tables taking up the entire interior, everyone who remained in the cabin was asked to leave when it came time to retire for the night. The crew worked to clear the cabin of tables and chairs, and the window seat cushions were removed. The curtain was drawn before the ladies' saloon, so that part of the cabin was now cut off from view. Over the place where the seats had been, that is, along the sides of the cabin, were rows of berths, just wide enough for a man to lie in, and just far enough apart for a man to creep in between them. There were 3 in each tier, an upper, a middle, and a lower one. The captain sits at the same table where our fares were paid, with the list of passengers in his hand. He calls out names in the order in which the passengers are listed. So the man at the top of the list gets first pick of the berth. Woe to the man who is at the bottom of the list. He might end up sleeping on the floor. At length, our attention was aroused by hearing a voice coming out from among the persons who were standing around the door of the cabin. It called out, "Mr. Fitzgerald." "Here," said Michael. "Come forward, Mr. Fitzgerald, and choose your berth." So Michael made his way as well as he could into the cabin, I following him. Michael pushed forward rapidly to the upper end of the cabin, and putting his hand upon the berth, said, "I choose this one, sir." Michael chose the middle one, in the tier which was nearest the ladies' saloon. "Very well, sir," said the captain. "You had better get right into it before anybody else gets it." I, of course, have a berth in the ladies' saloon, and the old ladies, of course, take the lower berths, while the upper ones are left for those of us who can climb. With this, the pleasure of traveling vanished, and I heartily wished myself home. My berth is composed of a narrow piece of cloth bound over 2 sticks, which are kept steady by 2 iron rods stuck into the wall and hung to the ceiling by ropes. This is too narrow to turn in, and by constant use sinks in the middle, while my head and feet are suspended by the iron rods. And the cleanness of the sheet, unaccountable. The male passengers, I'm told, generally only remove their hats, coats, and shoes to sleep. That is incommodious for the ladies, and we assist each other in removing our day frocks and donning a night dress. My accommodations are upon a par with the rest. Oh, for home, sweet home. For how can I sleep a wink in such a place? The beating and thumping which the boat endures while passing through the locks will surely throw me on the floor. But I am too weary to sit growling of what I cannot mend. So I will hold on to the ropes which hangs me up here, and perhaps I may be able to keep my station. With only a curtain to separate us from the gentlemen's quarters, it is easy to hear their remarks. "Oh, what a pillow! 'Tisn't bigger than my hand. Do you kick, sir, in your sleep?" Yes, I do kick, sir. For if you do, I don't want you over my head." "Captain, where shall I put my boots?" "Mr. Belden, here, choose your berth, sir. They're all taken but one." "Gentlemen, don't make such a noise. I want to go to sleep. My pillow is so thin, Captain, that it makes my head lower than my heels." May 28th. Waked at 4 o'clock, the ladies all awake. I am completely amazed at my sleeping in a place so void of comfort, and my poor hand is almost useless from the grasp which I gave the rope last night, fearing a fall from my perch. Sleeping, the toilet, and eating are all necessarily performed in the same apartment of close quarters with many people. Upon arising, the gentlemen went up on deck, where they could wash themselves from a basin which was placed upon a little bench near the spot where the steersman stood. There was a looking glass, too, hanging in a place where there was just room enough for one person to stand with a comb and a hairbrush by the side of it. Warm rainwater was delivered to the ladies' saloon for us to freshen up as best we could. As an aside, the smoking is bad enough, but please, let the warning label appear in boats, hotels, etc. No spitting allowed here. This would open many an unconscious eye, or even better, shut many an unconscious mouth. As we approached Little Falls, about 50 miles west of Schenectady, I could see a place where the placid, gentle character of the Mohawk becomes wild and romantic and beautifully picturesque. The canal is for some space cut through the solid rock, and the banks, high and bold, were crowned with tangled woods and gemmed with wild flowers and the delicate wild tufts of fern. It is exceedingly beautiful. We arrived in Little Falls at noon and will linger here for the purpose of visiting the falls. We dined at an inn along the canal. Every person in the house sits down at these public tables, though the higher places, or those near the landlord who presides, are always given up to strangers, or to persons of the most consequent present. The Mohawk descends perhaps 30 feet or more through channels worn in the solid rock. Upon leaving Little Falls, a group of 16 Presbyterian clergymen joined us on the trip to Utica, where they would attend a convention, and became an additional annoyance. My initial reaction was that I could tolerate them for the short passage to Utica. But at the lock in Herkimer, we encountered a substantial delay. A packet boat, wanting to get to the lock first, when trying to pass a scow carrying logs, careened off a line boat carrying barrels, upsetting them, sending both barrels and mules into the canal. All passage along the canal was halted in the ensuing brawl among the canalers. If there be a duty more obvious than another on board a canal boat, it is to walk on the bank occasionally, in fair weather, or at least to remain outside, in order to air the cabin, close enough at best, to get rid of the scents of the table before the passengers are shut up to sleep there. Michael and I enjoyed these towpath rambles, as with the help of the steward, getting on and off the boat was easily accomplished, even as the horses continued to pull the boat. These 16 clergymen could not wait until they got to Utica to begin their devotional observances, but obtruded them upon the passengers in a most unjustifiable manner. They were not satisfied with saying an almost interminable grace before and after each meal, but shut up the cabin for prayers before dinner, for missionary conversation in the afternoon, and for scripture reading and prayers quite late into the night, keeping tired travelers from their rest and denying everyone his fair allowance of fresh air. May 29. We finally arrived in Utica and bid farewell to the clergymen. Utica is a town rapidly increasing, and one which perhaps more than any other, excepting Rochester, has been advanced to an importance by the canal. We thought Utica, with its right-up shops, the daubed houses, the streets running into the woods, all seemed to betoken that the place had sprung up out of some sudden need. We were civilly received and accommodated at Baggs Hotel, where we knew how to value cold water, spacious rooms, and retirement after the annoyance of the boat. We planned our trip to include the pleasure of visiting several falls. Today we took a carriage to Trenton Falls, which is about 13 miles from Utica, a 2.5-hour ride. Trenton is indeed beautiful. The scenery is in many places very grand. There are 5 falls of water about a quarter of a mile from each other. Our path lay very near the stream, sometimes on a narrow projection of the large rocks which form a wall of immense height. Much has been said of the danger of the enterprise of ascending the ravine. Oh dear, to contemplate the 2 accidents which have happened here to 2 girls in the bloom of youth is exceedingly melancholy. Death is an ordinary occurrence, but at such a time and such a manner, his summons is truly appalling. I clearly recall the circumstances. Miss Eliza M. Sweeton, in her 17th year, with a party consisting of her father, mother, brother, and other relatives, in the course of a contemplated tour to Niagara, visited the Trenton Falls, much as Michael and I are doing. Whilst there and engaged in passing along the usual path for the purpose of viewing the falls, Miss Sweeton, who had the arm of her brother, released it for a moment to enable him to assist the other ladies. When, on again looking around, she was not to be seen, and the appalling truth became immediately evident that she had fallen from the precipice into the rapid stream below. All that was discovered, however, was her hat and comb floating in one of the whirlpools, and it was not until the next day, and that by aid of the police, that the body was recovered. And just a few years in the past, Miss Zerlina Thorne, about 8 years of age, was drowned in the very same place where Miss Sweeton met her watery grave. Colonel Herman Thorne was carefully conducting his wife over a narrow pass, having his daughter Zerlina in his arms, when a faithful servant stepped up and begged permission to take charge of the little girl. At first, Colonel Thorne declined, but was finally induced by the difficulty of the path to give the child over to the servant. He had scarcely done so, and turned to his wife when he heard a scream. The last sound ever uttered by the lovely child burst upon the ear, and he looked around to see the servant struggling in the boiling eddies, and to feel that his own cherished daughter he was to behold no more. The man had slipped upon the treacherous rocks, and with his charge was precipitated into the whirling stream. The little girl instantly disappeared. The man sustained himself until a stick was held forth by which he was drawn from the water. Thus, Zerlina perished before the eyes of her loving parents in the early blossom of her youth. I had seen pictures of Trenton Falls. Pictures, mockeries. The very best of them do more tell the character than a drop of water describes an ocean. Here it is not one fall alone, but a succession that takes the eye with delicious surprise. Just as the heart has ceased to beat with the grandeur of one view, a few steps farther shows another, almost more beautiful. May 30. Michael secured tickets for the next stage of our journey on what he calls a superior boat. The name of the boat is Triumph. It was built in Rochester by W. Howell and is light and graceful. Its cabin is 7 feet high with a washroom and a bar and fine paintings on the walls. Boats from Rochester's many shipyards have been called fairy palaces in miniature. I was tremendously excited. We are beginning to recognize that some packet boat operators aim to offer their passengers as luxurious a trip as possible in order to stand out against competition. How wonderful! There are no locks between here and Syracuse. By midday, we passed through Rome. Clinton's Ditch was begun here in 1817. I have heard some passengers, particularly those from Europe, scoff at the classical names of so many of our cities and the towns in New York. Utica, Rome, Troy, Ithaca, Cicero, Homer, Manlius, Arcadia, Macedon, Aurora, Bologna, Romulus, Aurelius, Brutus, Cato, Junius, Milo, Ovid, Seneca, Syracuse, Greece. But it brings a smile to my face. A little pretentious? No, not at all. I like to think that after the Revolution, New Yorkers looked to names from previous republics. Our traveling companions are most agreeable and congenial. A gentleman in one of the parties commenced reading the deformed in the old man's tales aloud. I soon became interested in the story, which was new to me, beguiled by the charm of the narrative and of his spirited manner. It was written by Anne Marsh Caldwell and is made up of 2 stories told by old men reflecting on events in their respective past. The Deformed tells the story of the deformed Earl of Saint Germain, heir to the Marquis of Brandon. After his stepmother gives birth to a son, Lord Louis, who is as good-looking as his mother, the young Earl is neglected. He finds companionship in Lila, a poor relative. I listened with tears until tears were making their way to my eyes. One must not weep in public before strangers. So I withdrew a little distance, where I could see the group without hearing the voice of the reader. The ladies struggled bravely with the pathos of the story, much more than I could have done. But I saw their eyelids partially closed, their mouths work with a slight muscular contraction, and their fingers busy with a glove or handkerchief. I heard the attempted jest to deprecate the charge of tears, and the scene was fairly winding up when we were summoned to dine. Our repast would rival that of any grand hotel. Snowy linen, solid silver service, the best china decorate the table. It was a sumptuous dining experience. The sun sank behind the hills. A gloom corresponding to my feelings spread over creation. The fireflies came out, like thoughtless companions, as if they could cheer the darkness with their flitting ray. And there were a few stars up above in the clouds. At this period, I could hear a song rising from the center of the deck. 2 exquisite female voices, accompanied by one of manly richness. I was refreshed and soothed, and felt that I could face taking my rest in the narrow cabin bunk bed. A new term for that wretched hammock I learned today. Much to my surprise and delight, the berths are hung with expensive curtains. A quiet, restful air of elegance permeates the interior. The sheets and blankets are immaculate, and we ladies will be attended by a cabin maid. As for Michael and the other gentlemen, in order to prevent partiality, there was a sort of lottery in which each person drew forth a number which determined his position for the night. May 30. We have settled into a lovely routine of shared reading, lively conversation, glorious music, and wonderful meals. We passed through many villages and towns, all brought to new prosperity by the canal. Canastota, New Boston, Chittenango, Manlius, and Orville. Tonight we will be in Syracuse. During the drive, we had opportunities of seeing the land in various stages of progress, from the dense, black-tangled native forests up to the highest stages of cultivation, with wheat and barley waving over it, or from the melancholy and very hopeless-looking state of things, when the trees are laid prostrate upon the earth, one upon the other, and a miserable log hut is the only evidence of man's presence. Syracuse is such a vibrant and thriving place. The Erie Canal passes through the very center of her, with fine, broad streets, large and commodious houses, gay shops, and stagecoaches, wagons, and gigs flying past, all in a bustle. In the center of the village, we could see from our windows the canal thickly covered with freight boats and packets, glancing silently past and shooting like arrows through the bridges, some of which were of stone and some of painted wood. The canal of this place had been made double its ordinary width, and being bent into an agreeable degree of curvature to suit the turn of the streets. The formality is removed, as well as the ditch-like appearance, which generally belongs to the canal. The water also is made to rise almost level with the towing path, which improves the effect. I was amused by seeing among the throng of loaded boats a gaily painted vessel lying in state with the words, "Cleopatra's Barge," pointed in large characters on her broadside. May 31. We prepared to leave Syracuse in the morning to make our way to Rochester, about 70 miles in distance. Since boarding the Triumph, I feel that we are moving along briskly. Michael says it is because the captain is traveling at more than the legal 4 miles per hour. Many captains think it is worth the $10 fine if caught. The faster they travel, the more trips they can make. A crowd has come to see the boat off. Why, I wonder, since surely after 15 years there is no novelty in arriving and departing boats. Then I caught sight of a band of 4 of them at the head of the flight of stairs leading to the landing. Bugle, trumpet, clarinet, and drums were carried on board. The musicians took up stations in the bow of the boat and broke forth into a fine martial air. The people came to hear the music as we set off to the west. We were not alone on the canal. There were homemade box-like boats built to take a farmer's produce to the city and pulled by the old farm horses. There were blunt-nosed line boats which carried freight from one end of the canal to the other and were often dragged along by sturdy little mules. There were trim-line packet boats whose smartly groomed teams had the right of way over all other animals on the towpath. Just beyond Syracuse, we are in sight of a sweet little lake, about 10 miles in length and 5 in breadth, and on the far side is a thriving town called Liverpool, a handsome town. In this neighborhood are the great salt works which now supply almost the whole of the United States. The drying vats cover many acres of ground. The efficient transportation of the much valued salt to markets throughout the United States generates a great amount of revenue. Onondaga salt, Michael tells me, has paid for about 1/3 of the cost of the canal. We traveled through numerous little towns and villages, any number of which were born due to the canal and all prospered by the canal. Fort Byron, Montezuma, Clyde, Lyons, Newark. In merely passing along on the canal, it was of course difficult to form any conjecture as to how much of the country was cleared, especially as new settlers naturally cling to canals, roads, and lakes. And it was such settlers only that we saw. Sometimes our track lay through a thick forest for a mile or two, though generally speaking, the country, for some distances on both sides of the towpath, was thickly strewn with houses or businesses. Palmyra was long established before the canal, but now thrives on canal traffic. While waiting in the crowd of boats, I left my boat with Michael and some others to stroll along down the canal. I passed the waiting boats, and in rotation, not far apart, were 3. One whose name was the Star, the next one the Spangle, and a short distance in line was the Banner. They might run on forever and never happen to be placed in such a rotation again. In every town and village, there is at least one mercantile establishment. These stores sell everything for the canal trade. The foodstuffs which the canal cooks, which the cooks purchase, including flour, crackers, brown and white sugar, and fresh fruit, and also tow lines, pitch for caulking boats, wood for cook stoves and for replacing the boats, tack and harness supplies for the horses or mule teams, hay, oats, and straw for the livestock, as well as soap, cooking utensils, lamps, and oil for the canalers and their passengers, and for the children, colorful penny candy. I purchased a length of beautiful patterned British cotton fabric to take as a gift to my Aunt Julia, for whom I was named. She lives in Rochester, as do my grandfather, Michael Fitzgerald, and my Uncle William. They are both coopers, turning out barrels for Rochester's flour industry. Poor Aunt Julia. Her husband, John Whalen, drowned in the Genesee River while he worked on building the Genesee Valley Canal, leaving her a widow with 5 children, all younger than 11. Oh, how careless and stupid of me. While purchasing the fabric, I laid my reticule down and neglected to pick it up again when I heard the bugle alerting us that the boat was getting ready to leave. Fearing I would be late, I hurried out of the store. When I told Michael, he dashed back to the store to retrieve it for me, just as the boat got underway. Michael came running to a bridge just as the boat was starting to pass under it. The people who were standing upon the lower deck at the stern held out their hands to Michael and said, "Jump! Jump!" My heart was in my mouth, but I needed to have credit as he landed safely on the roof. I think he considered it great sport. We passed through Pittsburgh and are now approaching Rochester. I am anxious to see this city where my relatives live, where 25 years ago there stood hardly a house and is now a large and populous manufacturing town. The Erie Canal passes through the heart of this singular town and strides across the Genesee River on a noble aqueduct of stone. It became the longest stone arch bridge structure in America when it was completed in 1823. It was the engineering wonder of the world. It is 804 feet long with 9 Roman arches. Its walls are of the red Medina sandstone obtained from the river gorge near Carthage, once the rival village of Rochesterville, but now whose star has set. Its coping is of gray limestone, and the whole was thoroughly grouted with massive iron bolts holding the masonry together. We are only a few miles from the southern shore of Lake Ontario, which I was sorry to find was not visible from the canal, owing to the dense screen of untouched forest which intervened. We will spend the night at the Rochester House Hotel. Erected in 1827, the Rochester House is kept by Charles Morton on Exchange Street, south of and adjoining the Erie Canal, at the west end of the Great Aqueduct. Our grandfather will spend the day with us tomorrow. Just last September, our president, Martin Van Buren, gave a speech from the hotel's balcony. June 1. Rochester is celebrated all over the Union as presenting one of the most striking instances of rapid increase in size and population of which this country affords any example. I am told that in 1815, the population was 331. Today, it has grown to 20,000. Its attributes of youth are the activity and eager life of which it is redundant. The whole street, sidewalks, and center was crowded with pedestrians, horsemen, stagecoaches, gigs, light wagons, and heavy ox teams, all hurrying, trotting, rattling, and rumbling, in a throng that passed continually, but never passed away. There is an abundance of waterfowl here. The Genesee has a considerable fall on the northeast of the city. One of these cataracts assumes an appearance of the sublime. The whole body of the river falls 96 feet in one unbroken sheet over a ledge of rock stretching across the river. It is a spot of magnificent natural beauty, but man is doing all he can mar it. The most beautiful rainbow I've seen is here. I feel contentment in gazing on these softeners of waterfalls. They speak a language amid the rush and tumult, like that conveyed by the rainbow in the heavens after a storm. This spot is famous as the scene of the last exploit of a singular individual known by the name of Sam Patch, who hit upon a very ingenious method of earning a livelihood, jumping for large wagers down cataracts, which daring feat he performed successfully more than once. But poor Sam Patch took one plunge too many, and after leaping with impunity from the rocks immediately below the Falls of Niagara, he found his death in the Genesee. I recall my father getting a letter from John Whalen describing the tragic event, as it occurred very near to where they lived on Allen Street. Why do we call Sam Patch a madman or a fool, when he has left his memory around the Falls of the Genesee more permanently than if the letters of his name had been hewn into the forehead of the precipice? Grandpa told me that there are 6 year-round boat yards in Rochester. Aunt Julia's husband John used to build boats before he was hired to work on the Genesee Valley Canal. We glide out of Rochester. Many businesses crowd the canal. We will return to Rochester for an extended stay after we complete our visit to Niagara Falls. We pass through Brockport. Think of all those villages that now end in port because of the canal. We then pass through Holly and Albion. The trip west is smooth of path as there are no locks between Rochester and Lockport. There are stretches of uncultivated land with large growth forests. I while away an hour or two reading Miss Jane Austen's novel, Elizabeth Bennet, for Pride and Prejudice, lent to me by a Mrs. Reardon, who called me a blue stocking. I don't know whether to be pleased or insulted. In order to obtain the advantage of having such an inexhaustible reservoir as Lake Erie for a feeder to the canal, it became necessary to cut down the top of the ridge on which Lockport stands, to bring the canal level somewhat below that of the lake. For this purpose, a magnificent excavation called the Deep Cutting, several miles in length, with an average depth of 25 feet, was made to a compact horizontal limestone stratum, a work of great expense and labor, and highly creditable to all parties concerned. Michael says, the deep cut remains one of the canal's greatest engineering achievements. Lockport is celebrated over the United States as the site of a double set of canal locks, admirably executed side by side, 5 in each, one for boats going up, the other for those coming down the canal. The original level of the rocky tableland about Lockport is now a little lower than the surface of Lake Erie, from which it is distanced by the line of the canal about 30 miles. June 3rd. We pass on for a few hours, and the waters of the Niagara River, or rather Strait, come in sight. Then the blue waves of Lake Erie were visible in the distance. The water of said river, Niagara, is of a most peculiar color. The turquoise like a turquoise when it turns green. It was like a thick stream of verdigris full of pale milky streaks, whirls, eddies, and countercurrents, and it looked as if it were running up one bank and down the other. Long before our arrival at this place, the noise of the waterfall had become distinctly audible, and the cloud of foam visible for an equal distance. The coach drove up to an elegant hotel, and in a few minutes more, I was at the falls. By the time you have looked steadily for a few moments, you become overpowered by the stupendous, almighty scene. The river is divided by an island above the falls into 2 unequal parts. the larger body of falling water on the precipice on the Canadian side. For a half mile above the falls, the rapids begin, and there is sometimes a beautiful spectacle as the water broke into thousands of cascades. Then comes the mighty cataract in one sheet of tumultuous foam, and from and over it the spray, like a purely white cloud, rises in 1,000 fantastic shapes. The day, the hour, the minute when one eye first rests on the Grand Horseshoe Fall is an epic in the life of any man or woman gazing on a scene of splendor and sublimity far greater than the unaided fancy of a poet or painter ever pictured. One receives an impression which time cannot diminish. The results of that single moment will extend through a lifetime, enlarge the sphere of thought, and enhance the whole tissue of one's moral being. Tonight, I find it almost impossible to sleep, so I write in my journal. What a thrilling adventure we had on the Erie Canal.
Do you have any questions?
You're on.
It's on?
If you have any questions or comments, I'd like to take the microphone to you because we are recording this. And if anybody got anybody want to raise your hand for any? Nobody? All right.
I see there's only one towpath. How did the horses pass?
Want to know how the horses passed in the towpath?
The length of the towpath rope was about 200 feet long. So packet boats always had right of way. So if they were encountered a line boat, for example, the line boat could still keep moving, but they had to drop their tow line into the water of the canal, and then the packet boat or whatever boat could always pass right over it. Yep, okay.
How did you find all those photos?
Oh, they took a lot of work. I loved it when I said, okay, I'm looking for something perfect. Now, some of them aren't exactly the right time. Some of them might have been a little earlier, some might have been a little later. But I was hoping just to catch the sentiment of what they might have seen. Yeah.
I have a question. On a boat, there's a certain facility called the head. I heard no.
Question no one wants to answer. Now, we did have one of our journalists mention the fact that the toilet preparing in the morning is done with a lot of people and no privacy. So they had to share chamber pots. And then the chamber pots were dumped into the canal. Not too clean, she shuddered.
Wait a minute.
Somebody else back there.
Somebody back there.
You talked about the canal along the Mohawk River. Was the Mohawk River incorporated in the canal, or did the canal run along the edge of the river?
The canal paralleled it. The canal ran parallel.
Parallel? Thank you.
Get Gina. She raised her hand.
Was somebody?
Gina.
All right, Gina.
Not really a question, but I just want to thank you, Maureen, because it just made me feel like I was on a trip down the canal. It was really cool.
The Barge Canal, Barge Canal was what, 1911?
1918.
18.
1918.
Sorta.
1818?
1918.
Right, okay. Well, it follows much of the same path, but not the exact path, right?
No.
Because being from Waterford, I know where the Barge Canal starts. Thank you.
Okay, the barge canal does follow the Erie Canal, but not in all places, particularly when we get to Rochester. As I said here, the Erie Canal used to pass right through the center of Rochester. I mean, you know, the Broad Street Bridge. That is the second aqueduct, by the way. The first one leaked miserably with the Medina sandstone. But that was built in about 1840 something. It was after 1840. But it is still the same aqueduct that was replaced the first one. And only one, you could only go in one direction at a time. So all the boats got held up until they came one way and then another. So they moved it south, and they started moving it south right here in Greece, which is why we have the remnants of a junction lock off of Ridgeway Avenue. They used that for a while to connect still to the old aqueduct until everything could be rerouted south.
Were there always tolls on and where were they collected?
At way stations.
Okay.
There used to be one in Rochester, there used to be one in Syracuse.
The one in Syracuse is still
Yeah,
preserved.
it's with the museum, yeah, type of thing. Yeah. You know how you go along the thruway and it says trucks gotta go stay and they need wait?
Yeah.
Same thing, except it was the boats. And they were charged a certain amount for every barrel or every passenger. And of course that charge was incorporated into the price of the ticket. I think it's very interesting that, let me get my references here. As I said, I did 12 different ones. Jacob Abbott, Clarissa Burrows, Caroline Gilmore, Basil Hall, Thomas Hamilton, Nathaniel Hawthorne, Herbert Holman, Fanny Kemble, H.B. Marsh, Harriet Martineau, Harriet Beecher Stowe, and Thomas Woodcock.
Oh, really?
Yes. So, and
Recognize her.
so I mentioned Sam Patch, not just because I've done things on Sam Patch in the past, but because probably 3 or 4 of these writers mentioned him. They were all just stunned by the beauty of Niagara Falls. I mean, that they considered it almost a spiritual experience. So different from what nowadays, you know, you can see it on TV or something like that, but seeing something in person, especially when they had so little chance to do such a thing, always made a big impression. And they all hated the sleeping accommodations.
Good Lord, Holton Mifflin Company still.
Hawthorne compared it to pigs being stacked up in after being butchered. There's,
How far away from Niagara Falls is the end of the canal?
Which portion? The Buffalo River or the Tonawanda exit?
You're giving away. Okay, I got it.
actually, I'm going to hand the mic to Pat because he can probably answer that better.
Yeah.
I didn't repeat the question.
Basically, the first part is which one was the closer exit for the canal, and then basically, so the canal used to exit at the end of the commercial slip in Buffalo at the Buffalo River. It shifted at the same time. Rochester and Syracuse shifted out of their cities, so now the current exit ends in the city of Tonawanda. They have a joint canal day in Tonawanda and North Tonawanda to celebrate the canal. And basically that's where you end up now. It still exits at Lockport, but Lockport now shifts into Tonawanda because with all the traffic, the grain silos are still there for General Mills. That still gets heavy traffic. They still get a lot of this. If you're ever out there, it smells like Cheerios. Yes. People love the smell of Cheerios in the morning. I used to smell it every day. But the commercial slip evolved just like Rochester. It was also Black Rock. That's because they were doing a lot of iron smelting out there. But from what we had John, who came in August, he did a little bit more in depth of the Buffalo area, because both will be coming to Rochester at the end of the month for their journey down to New York City to reenact the wedding of the waters, but on their path they are actually planting white pines in replace of what was destroyed to make the canal.
Feel like the fuel came down.
Any other comments, questions? All the way to the back.
See if you can just repeat the question.
Oh, where is that, over the road?
That's look at a map.
Yes. Repeat the question.
Medina.
The
The
culvert.
question was
The culvert.
where the culvert that goes under the canal,
Yes.
you wanted to know where it was.
Oh, right, right.
The Medina culvert.
Yeah, got it.
Okay, everything? All right, thank you.
She did mention the aqueduct over the Genesee River, and to tell you about modern technology, the bottom part of that Broad Street Bridge was built a little after 1840. In the 1920s, they built a cover over it with a road for the subway. In the 1970s, they had to completely rebuild that top section. In the bottom section, they had to repoint some of the stones. It's still the 1845 bridge that you drive over. Amazing. They didn't have computers. They were gonna... want to thank everybody for coming. We had over 80 people today. If you're not a member of the Greece Historical Society, you are, of course, welcome to join us. It's $20, $15. And we are on Facebook. Follow what we're doing there. I don't know how everybody found out about this, but a lot of you members. Thank you so much. And thank the school district for allowing us here.
I know you.
Want to learn more from the Greece Historical Society and Museum? Then click that subscribe button. Hit that bell icon to get notified when there's new content coming from the Greece Historical Society. You can visit us on the web at GreeceHistoricalSociety.org. You can find us on Facebook at Greece Historical Society. And you can stop in at the Greece Historical Society at 595 Long Pond Road. This has been a Greece Historical Society Productions.